This is the Books Podcast presented by Tim Hague.
I don't think the average man does see himself as a dangerous person. This is not a story about murder. This is a story about its aftermath. What happens to a murderer after he does the deed?
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
As a reader, I've always been kind of a magpie, as in, ooh, shiny, I'll read that. And as an interviewer, to be honest, I've sometimes been very much the same. In 1990, Paul Theroux was in town, so naturally I grabbed him. He was perhaps best known as a travel writer, and I don't much bother with travel writing, although to be fair, I do read his. But happily, his current book was a novel, and that was right up my street.
Chicago Loop, a disturbing slice of modern American life. The book is written with the skill you would expect of Paul Theroux, but it is not a comfortable read. We're caught up in the madness of irrational murder. There is a series of horrific killings in which the victims are literally bitten to death, and inevitably the press dubbed the unknown killer the Wolfman. And we find ourselves in the grim inner-city decay of Chicago, Illinois. Well, the city has a very real presence in this novel, the lake, the Sears Tower, and that loop. Tell me about the Chicago Loop. What is that?
The Loop itself is an area in the very heart of the city, which is the heart of the country. Heart of the state, I should say, of Illinois, and the country too, because it's Chicago sees itself as the heartland of America, and the Loop is a number of square blocks, which is completely surrounded by an L. I could call it a subway, except it's an overground train, an elevated railway, which runs completely around it. The Loop, it's called, and trains circulate to it or go to it and radiate from it. And that's seen as sort of the heart of the city, except it's kind of a dead heart of a city, or a stopped heart, because it's the financial district. No one actually lives there. There are sleazy bars and fast food places and so forth, but it's a very, very weird place, very shadowy. Even on a hot day, you see these very, very dark shadows everywhere. And I saw it as a place that was circumscribed. I also think that it was a perfect title because, in a way, the plot of the book is a loop. Man starts and comes really full circle. But this sort of, in the sense of a crime story, which comes around to its beginning.
And it does come full circle as
yes,
well.
It does, because it's a book about a man who kills someone and then, in a fit of remorse, wants to sort of make everything right, and so he takes on the identity of his victim.
Now, he's nuts, of course. The man is called Parker Jagoda. Am I pronouncing that right? I wondered if that dead heart of Chicago and that heartland reference to America was also what you were getting at. Is this book about America, or is it about Chicago? Is there something special about Chicago?
I thought of Chicago. I mean, that's a difficult question, because I think of him as an American. I don't think of this as an English story. This is not an English murder, so to speak, but I think of it as American and perhaps Chicago in that sense. You know, we have 11,000 criminal homicides a year, and I think perhaps that's the informing fact, the fact that we have a very high murder rate, and some of them are very weird. Although I got the idea from a book about Dennis Nielsen. Dennis Nielsen said that he was one of the young men that he killed made him so sorry, he felt so remorseful, he wanted to take the identity of this victim and become that man and take on that man's life, just as an act of expiation.
And of course, that's what Parker does with the woman Sharon he murders. He then, in a way, he's identifying with the violence that has been visited upon her, but he can't identify with it as a man. He can only identify with it as Sharon, in a way. He almost takes on her identity, or completely takes on her identity. Is his sense of that violence something that can that only women can suffer?
Let me put it this way. I think that only a woman can understand a man's violence. Men don't realize, I think, how scary looking they seem. Most men feel ineffectual. Most men feel like wimps. Most men feel deprived, they feel weak, they feel vulnerable, and they think they have a terrible life. They don't see themselves as brutes, most men, I don't think, speaking as a man. I think women perceive men as brutish and dangerous, and many men are dangerous. But a man doesn't see himself that way. I mean, I don't think the average man does see himself as a dangerous person. Most men would say, I don't meet enough women, I never get a chance, isn't it to hell being a man? They say the sort of things that women say, as a matter of fact, which is that society is closed to them, they don't have enough sex, they don't have any friends, they're lonely. Just a kind of woman's complaint, you might say. And it's when he takes on the identity of the woman, he understands what it's like to be a victim. But he hadn't seen it before.
The extent to which one might be worried in that is that the central character, Jagoda, is explored fairly deeply, but none of the women in the book gets as much exploration as Parker. We never quite do get as far into them.
That's impossible in this novel because I wanted to write the novel entirely from the point of view of the psychopath. Everything in the book is seen through his eyes. The city, the heat, the women, the meals, the food, the expense, the car, everything, the weather, no matter what. It's all, including his wife, seen through his eyes. We never see his wife. We never see his wife sort of on her own. It's entirely his point of view. And that was deliberate because I thought that I wanted to sort of get into his skin and see the world through his skin, to see both its normality and its strangeness, but just to make the focus located entirely on him. The thing that I was interested most in this novel, and the reason I wrote it, is to give voice to remorse and to the inability. I mean, people talk about murder and crime and punishment all the time, and perhaps they should have capital punishment or not, as the case may be, or maybe do finger painting or have riots in prisons or whatever. But no one really comments on the total inability to replace a human life. Once someone has been killed, there's nothing you can do. And this is a remorseful man, a man who's killed someone. He can't bring that person back to life. And he knows that no matter what is done to him in the legal or judicial sense, it won't be enough. Then he should die himself, but then that would make someone else a murderer or a killer. So I think that that some crimes are solved when the police wait for the anniversary of the murder and go back to the scene of the crime. Or they have a stakeout at a cemetery where the victim is buried, and the murderer, the guilty man who hasn't been caught, goes and puts flowers on the victim's grave. Or the murderer lurks in the area where the murder took place a month later, a year later, 5 years later, or whatever. The memory of a murderer is quite interesting, and even the remorse of a murderer. I'm not talking about how pitiful they are. I'm just talking about the way a person feels sorry and doesn't know what to do, and in a perverse kind of way is the only person who knows what that this is the anniversary, or feels that they have to do something and they don't quite know what to do. And it was that's the perversity or the strangeness, which is partly human and deeply criminal. So it's let's say the human or remorseful side of the criminal mind. But also most writers have this sense of dressing up in other people's clothes, becoming a woman, becoming a man, and getting into the mind of someone else. And I think that to a certain extent, Parker is a writer. He's a sort of creative man too. I mean, there's a sort of creative side to him.
Well, he does create the world as he goes through it. At one point in the book, he more or less despises everybody he sees, every newspaper vendor and family going on holiday. And at another point, he almost envies them because he feels distance because of his remorse.
Well, he knows he's dangerous. I think only the murderer knows he's dangerous. And he knows and no one else knows. And he in a way, is going around wishing to warn people of his own danger.
But should we care about him, given that he's committed then this one act which you cannot redeem, you cannot recall?
I don't know whether you should care in the sense of wanting him to reform, but I think you should care in the sense of perhaps wondering what lies beneath him, wondering even in a clinical kind of way what he's going to do next. This is not a story about murder. This is a story about its aftermath. What happens to a murderer after he does the deed? Detection doesn't interest me at all. But how does that man live? What does he do? I'm always interested in the fact that a murderer then has to go and eat something, or sleep somewhere, or see somebody, or say something to somebody. And one of the most horrifying details of a murder in the United States recently of a man on death row was after he killed this person, he then ate the person's lunch. And it was the fact that
terrific.
yes, after he ate that person, that was seen as a kind of the sign that that man was incorrigible and belonged on death row. As I said, 11 or 12,000 murders are committed in the United States every year. But that one, that man, his name was Harris in California. He just had a stay of execution. That was always seen as the detail that made him, he was a real wicked, evil man. He ate his Big Mac.
Eating actually is a big theme of the book, and you make I think a lot and very successfully out of the switch in Parker's attitude to food. He starts off very fastidious and very concerned with eating health food, and in his remorse, and this is what I want to ask you about. He determinedly eats junk food as a way. I think is he punishing himself or what?
I think he's written himself off at that point. Yes, eating this junk, and that that's the end of all hope. It's a kind of, as he says earlier, when someone's eating junk food, it's a kind of passive suicide. But for him, that's the utter contempt. Smoking a lot, eating the wrong food, and not caring. When you've lost all self-respect and all hope. That's what you do. You eat crap. Because you think that you are that way.
Lots of us, I don't smoke, but I eat Big Macs. I sometimes will drink more than is entirely good for me. Are we all writing ourselves off?
I think that's something you do. You're young, and you think that you can do it. When you turn 40, as I did 9 years ago tomorrow. I'm 40 now. When I turned 40, I stopped smoking, and I started to think, I want to live. I want to live. I want to be healthy, and I want to be alert. I want my brain to be clear, and I think I care about my health. I don't want to wake up and feel rotten in the morning. So I started to care about it. And when I started to change my diet, I became a vegetarian. I started to write about people who eat. And I started to write about food and food started entering my work, say, about 1981, 82. Now you say, you do it. Is there anything wrong with it? I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it. You have to sort of make your own decisions. I don't think there's anything wrong with your making your own choice. But if it were up to me, no, I wouldn't want to eat junk. I don't eat junk. But life is too short. Why not eat the right stuff and feel sort of healthy? I mean, why eat junk? I don't see the point of it. Life is too short, surely.
Can I throw back at you another couple of quotations from the book? At one point somebody says, or thinks, I forget which, love had not been enough, and that's a general observation. At another point somebody says or thinks sex was always destructive. Is that particular to this book, or is that a grander statement? Am I reading too much into it?
I think that Parker feels that. Parker feels love is not enough and sex is always destructive. Actually, personally, I think that love it ought to be enough, that real love is what rescues people from despair, and that sex is magic in both love and sex and work too. Those three things, there's transformation. We can transform ourselves that way. And I suppose that's one of the subjects of, or that's one of the sort of, I guess, controlling ideas of the books that I've written. I think there's more love, sex, and work in them than there is religion, God, and, I don't know, politics, let's say.
Yeah, one of the scary things about this book, actually, I think it is chilling and extremely well written. One of the scary things is that this man has a wife who loves him and who is good to him, and there is nothing obviously wrong with her, and a child and a home, and he's an architect. But that having that home life marks him off a lot from characters in fiction who do terrible things.
The lone wolf, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I think it is, but I don't think... I mean, his wife meets him in lonely hotel rooms and pretends to be someone else. She dresses up... I don't want to spoil the story for anyone who's... but they have these elaborate games, and she goes along with it. I don't think that she realizes what she's got herself into. But certainly she goes along with him. And I mean, it's the going along and perhaps not realizing what she's going along with that feeds his imagination, and that in a sense sort of turns him slightly in the direction that I suppose he was going to go into anyway. But to say that he has a home life, a wife and child, is nothing. But she's rather a peculiar woman, and I wouldn't say his home life is it's very different from the home life, as they say, of our own dear Queen.
Finally, it's a desolate story in the sense that it then is about all these gruesome and grisly things and about madness. Who is it for?
I would say this novel is for my readers. If you read a writer's work, you have a kind of coherent view, not only of his or her world, but of your own world.
Paul Theroux, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chicago Loop is published by Hamish Hamilton.
That was Books Podcast, presented by Tim Haig. Books Podcast is a Green Shoot production. You can find out more at www.green-shoot.com, and Tim can be contacted on tim@green-shoot.com.